Every element that sustained prior forms of British and English life is declining or has dipped down. Marriage and the family is in turmoil, and hardly anyone is marrying. Procreation amongst our own group is down. Crime and violence is up by every register. Vandalism and social misbehaviour and mild to evident chaos is semi-permanent. And people who live on the estates have to deal with it 24/7. Areas in our towns and cities are semi-segregated. And yet none of the political leaders, not Clegg, the new one in charge of the Liberals, but no difference there, not Cameron, not Brown for Blair, none of them will mention these issues. And the only way in which they ever approach these issues is the reverse way around, trying to accommodate minorities, trying to suggest that majorities should be more liberal-minded. The French president yesterday, it was all over the news bulletins, addressed our Houses of Parliament, saying what a great tradition the British have, what a great nationality they are, and he defined the first British virtue as tolerance. Toleration, he said. And this is what Blair used to say when he was in power. But the truth is, when we fought in wars in the past, when we conquered large stretches of the earth in the past, we didn't have tolerance in our hearts. We had glory and strength and heroic courage and racial feeling. That's what we had. And that's what we need to have again, if we are not to disappear in our own towns, our own cities, even in time our own villages. What the British and the English need to do is to wake up to the massive changes which are occurring globally and nationally. There's no way we can just put up a wall anymore. We have been plugged into the world and to events happening on the other side of the world, not because we wished it, but because of the politics of our elite. Iraq and the war that occurred there is 5 years old. That war has cost £7 billion. Although when they have an Exchequer's or Chancellor's statement, they don't mention that in the debates. You have to go to the details of the so-called blue and red books to find it. We've lost 176 men. We've achieved virtually nothing in southern Iraq. And we did it because of the Americans, and they did it for many reasons, including some of the influences in their own society, very few of which will be discussed by mainstream politicians who ask for inquiries about this war. This war wasn't fought in our interest and has relatively little to do with us, and has given a significant segment of the world more of a quote-unquote excuse to hate us and to wish to place bombs in our cities. I know somebody who was in Tavistock Square a quarter of an hour before one of the bombs went off. If you ever hear explosions in an urban context, they have an unnatural sound. Crack! There's this sort of sound which is unnatural. The ear isn't used to hearing it. It's this sort of plastic, strangely sort of synthetic sound. And that was the bus bomb, of course, going off in Tavistock Square that obliterated this number 25 or whatever it was, and threw part of the top of the carriage of the bus across the square and smashed to pieces some phone boxes which were to one side of it, and actually lifted them up into the air and threw them across one of these urban gardens. You know, some of these posh squares in London, they have a little sort of terrace park in the middle. Now, much of that square was wrecked. Whether it was accidental or not, one doesn't know. The Board of Deputies of British Jews is adjacent to that square. And maybe that was one of the many reasons why that device was detonated there. But there are other theories. One theory is that one of the tube lines was shut, and he rang his colleagues, the particular terrorist, 96 times on his mobile to explain he couldn't get on that line. And one theory is he got on the bus and blew his device up there because he wanted to join his fellows. But he couldn't do it underground, so he had to do it overground. Whatever. That terrorist incident, 50 dead, 400 maimed, was, in global terms, an amateurish incident done by a small group of lads who got together, primarily in Leeds and with a cutout in Luton, so to do. Al-Qaeda claimed it retrospectively, but deep down, those sorts of small hits are, although they'll claim them on the internet, not really what they want. What they want is enormous explosions, such as the Heathrow conspiracy of about 2 years ago. Planes going into buildings, planes misdirected and flying into nuclear plants, of which Labour wants to build a large number more. These are the big hits they want. They want massive situationist stunts that block out all media, and wall-to-wall news all over the world indicates what's happened. And they want to do this because they see themselves at war with the type of civilization that Bush, Brown, Blair, Sarkozy and others have created. They think of themselves as white, liberal, tolerant, affordable people, open to the world and open to any point of view. That's not how militant Islamic vanguardists see them. They see them as hateful Western imperialists dominating by their secularity, making war on behalf of Israel against them in the Middle East, and they want to hit back, and they want revenge. And liberals have allowed 2 million people who theocratically can't, in any sense, beyond the odd individual who assimilates, react and adapt to our civilization at all. John Biffin was a Tory MP who supported Enoch Powell's lines on these things and said these people will not assimilate, and in a way, why should they? They have a different civilization to us. But liberal-minded people believe that we're all the same, and that we can all mix in, and that all cultures are interchangeable, and you can have a pot puree, you can have a bit of this, and a bit of that, and a bit of the other. Speaking of which, the Archbishop of Canterbury opened his mouth about these things recently, about 2 to 3 weeks ago now, when, in a sort of elitist audience, talking to fellow professors, because he's an academic, and barristers in the Inns of Temple in the city, he talked about Sharia law, and sort of moving his dog collar up and down, and moving his braces up and down, and this sort of thing, and a well-lunched, he said, what about Sharia law then? What about it? Shouldn't, for small little things, marriage and commercial disputes, and things that don't involve interest and so on, why don't we just allow a small space in our society for this sort of alternative or parallel system of law to be created? Why not? Where's the harm in that? The only people who are against this, he would say, are intolerant people and bigots, the sort of people we don't want to give house room to. These people on the fringes, the moral equivalents of the terrorists, as Cameron calls the British National Party. Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's a bit of a sort of ninny in his own world, not particularly media savvy, got the fright of his life because the whole media, in a rather illiberal firestorm actually, reacted partly to what he hadn't said, partly to what he wanted to say, partly between the gap between what he wanted to say and what he actually said, and partly to what he said. And he retreated under the table for quite a few weeks and was shocked by the response. Even Brown and the other political leaders slapped him around and he went and hid for a while. And he did that because at one level it's amusing, you know, the chap couldn't wait to get the dog collar off and the caftan on, could he? But there's a degree to which, when I heard him make those remarks, I thought to myself, what's really going on there? What's really underneath these remarks? Which one can, at one level, have a bit of fun with. What's he really talking about? And deep down, he's given up. He's given up on his own belief system. I'm not a Christian. I'm a pagan. But he's the Archbishop of Canterbury. He should be in favour of his religiosity. He shouldn't be saying, come here, it's just a story, we once believed in it, we'll accept your law, you can accept a little bit of ours, we can all get on and be friends. That is not the attitude which you expect from any sort of a denominational leader, from any sort of a leader at all. And none of these other faiths, and none of these other groups, and none of these other nationalities have any respect for people like that. They regard them as weak little ninnies and fools. These types of civilizations in some ways have remained partly pre-modern. They respect masculinity and strength. They don't respect a bloke lifting up his beard and saying cut here as quickly as possible. If he was actually a bit more militant, they would actually have a bit of time for him. This is one of the paradoxes. Good. He was actually criticised by Carey, one of his predecessors in the post, if you like. And don't forget that this one's a Blair appointee. Although he's Welsh and came from the Church of Wales, he was appointed in post by Blair. Yet another of these appointments of a destructive